On to another episode of Dialogue Over Division, and today I have with me Jesse Berger, who has written a very interesting book called Magic Internet Money. I already love the title, it's great, and it's all about Bitcoin. I'm really excited about this conversation. As you know, this whole series is meant to elevate the conversation. We need to have an understanding about our legal and political systems and how all of that is financed. How that impacts us as citizens is very important. Bitcoin is one that's been coming up a lot, and I have a very basic knowledge about it. So I'm very excited to learn more. And with that, Jesse, I'll turn it over to you for a bit of an introduction as well.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me, Eva. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all the work you're doing. I truly, your posts publicly and everything, I think you speak very well for Canadians and Canadian values.
Well, thank you.
For myself personally, I spent a little over a decade on Bay Street working in retail banking and wealth management and management consulting. I started my career basically right as the global financial crisis hit. So I sort of had a crash course right off the bat in fiat currency and central banking. And I very vividly remember, they printed $600 billion, the first big bailout to bail out the banks. And I remember I'm fresh out of university, having studied economics, thinking maybe I know a thing or two, sitting there thinking they just had $600 billion lying around and they decided just this industry is going to get it and that's somehow going to fix everything. This doesn't add up. And basically that sent me on a very long, many years long journey of re-educating myself on economics and money, and by association politics, because it's all sort of intertwined, to figure out, how does the system really work? Why does it really work or not work in a lot of instances? Initially, I became a gold bug because at the time, I started my career in 2006, but around 2008, 2009 is when I really started to piece things together. I understood that gold has been money for thousands of years. There are very specific reasons why gold was good, sound money. And so I stacked gold for a number of years. But I had heard about Bitcoin, call it in 2011. And at the time, I understood three very basic things about it. Number one, there is a supply limit of 21 million coins. There's never going to be more than 21 million coins in total. Those 21 million coins, so point number two, are issued on a predetermined schedule, meaning they're not all brought into existence at once. They take time to come into existence. The rate of issuance started very rapidly, and it's basically slowly getting harder and harder, decreasing. And the quote inflation rate or issuance rate of Bitcoin is decreasing over time until the point that it becomes flat and there will be no new issuance. So that's point number two. Point number three is that there are no free coins. Doesn't matter who you are, what you do, under no circumstances can you just hit, control, copy, paste, and poof, you have extra money.
$600 billion.
$600 billion. So with Bitcoin, you had to put in some kind of effort, some combination of time and energy and skill in order to earn the part of the new issuance that would be coming out. So no free money, predetermined schedule, and fixed limit. Those three things alone happen to make Bitcoin very, very good money. There's a few other factors as well, and we can maybe get into that a little bit on the show here. But I first encountered it, like I said, in 2011, but it wasn't really until 2017 that I really got into that world and did anything about it. I didn't buy any back in 2011. I wish I had. I wanted to buy it. It was like $2, and I said to a few buddies, hey, maybe we should buy some. But we were just, a couple idiot bankers who were like, well, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And then we realized we're idiot bankers. We wouldn't know how to hold a wallet, if we tried, because infrastructure at the time was negligible, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the very, very beginning of Bitcoin, when it was very cheap, you had to really want it and you had to really invest the time and research to figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
And as time's gone on and the value has increased, what has happened is you have more people, more value in the industry and more mind share. So people who maybe were early adopters to some degree or benefited from it thought, hey, this is good. I see value here. I'm going to start spending more time in this part of the world, in the Bitcoin world, than in the old fiat world, and I'm going to contribute to it. So they built up exchanges, wallets, all kinds of infrastructure that makes it so easy that now I can literally sit with someone for 10 minutes and say, hey, download this app, and you have a very, very good, easy to use wallet on your phone or computer right away. So that was sort of my journey. I ended up leaving the corporate world in 2018 to basically pursue a vague career in Bitcoin that, wound up with me accidentally writing a book. I didn't set out to be an author. I was never trained to be an author. It just sort of came together. And I've been educating people about Bitcoin ever since.
Awesome. Very interesting. And so, yeah, I want to really get into what it is too, because I think that's a big drawback for people. And you did mention the infrastructure, that there wasn't a lot there, because you don't have it, it's not tangible. So how do people reconcile that? And is that a concern for you?
It's not a concern. I'll give you an example why.
Okay.
The old Rand McNally maps, like where you would have books of maps of streets if you were to go on a road trip, 20, 30 years ago and drive around the country, and you had to figure out which road took you where. Do you remember those?
Yeah. When you mentioned it, I remembered, but it doesn't come to my head right away.
What do you use for a map now?
Yeah, Google. Your phone, of course.
Can you touch the Google map?
Well, not really, I guess. It depends. You can open and kinda. Not in the same way, obviously.
Not in the same way, but
yeah.
Even though it's not physically tangible in the same way, is it more or less useful because you can find every road on a single page effectively, just zoom in or out. And in addition to not just the roads, you get all the restaurants and shops listed. You get their hours of operations. You get their ratings and customer reviews, right? You have so much more functionality, and it all fits on this little tiny device, right? Mm-hmm. Same with Bitcoin.
Okay, well, but I'm just going to go right to there because we're talking about that. Is that a good thing that everything is on a phone? That we don't have tangible things maps were a bit annoying, especially because things would change or if you didn't have the right town, then you're screwed. But is it something we want to have, especially finances, all of your assets on a phone like that?
Sure. So let's cover, and to be clear, it's not, I shouldn't say they exist on the phone. Right. The phone is sort of a portal. It's a window, or my laptop, it's a window, but the coins don't exist per se on a phone. The same way Google Map doesn't exist on the phone. It's sort of everywhere. So let's talk about a couple of examples. Number one, defense. So I would argue that Bitcoin is the most defensible property asset or money that exists. And I'll give you an example. Gold is a physical item, right? In a sense, you could think of it as a drawback because you have to physically hold it and store it in a safe. And it has that physical presence. You have to defend it. With Bitcoin, I can own Bitcoin and it has zero physical footprint whatsoever. If I can memorize 12 words in my head, I can literally carry my Bitcoin around with me all over the world. It's accessible with me absolutely everywhere I go. It is liquid everywhere I go. I can transport it, I can send it, I can receive it to anyone, to anywhere, from anywhere, at any point in time. So it is highly defensible and highly mobile. So that's, I would argue that is a major, major benefit to Bitcoin as money over gold. The way I perceive gold now, and I mentioned off air just before we hopped on here that I was a former gold bug. I got gold. I understand gold, and it was money for thousands and thousands of years. But the way I look at it now is that it's kind of doomer money. It's like apocalyptic money. I don't really see a real scenario where it becomes the currency of the world in a way where it can be trustless or trust minimized. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So gold, the reason the gold standard failed was that gold centralized in a bunch of big vaults that the central banks managed. Mm-hmm. And then they issued more notes than they had gold bars, right? We agree on that?
Yes.
So if we were to have a gold standard again, one of two things has to happen. One, we have to abolish the sort of note system and we have to use actual physical gold. But is that really conducive for business in the real world?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is that going to lead to a very active, happening commercial, society where business is getting done? I would argue probably not.
Likely not.
Right. Bitcoin exists for the world as it is today and the future of society, right? I view it as a very, if we're going to be optimistic about the outcome of society and the direction we can go in, we're going to continue to exist on the internet with digital infrastructure, and we need a native money of, the internet digital age. And I think Bitcoin fits that bill. Gold does not. At the very best, you could, quote, tokenize gold or create a digital representation of gold. But you run into the issue where you still have to trust that that digital token is directly connected back to the real world. And there's no way that you can guarantee that connection.
Yeah, no, I see the value and the concerns around gold, 100%. Like, that's not the debate. But then,
Yep.
like you said, you need to memorize the 12 words. So let's say you don't, or
Yeah.
you lose your wallet.
Yeah.
It's all gone, isn't it? Like, there's
Yeah.
no insurance policy.
So I would argue, yes, there is no insurance policy without question. There is no fallback with Bitcoin. You are personally responsible for your Bitcoin. So that weight of Bitcoin, the responsibility that you have to bear by whether you memorize it or whether you etch it into steel, which is what a lot of people do now, especially if it becomes worth enough.
So, can you just explain what that means? Etch it in the
You
steel?
could literally take a steel plate about
Yeah.
that big and with either a diamond tip pen, or you could scratch your words so that, if the bank vault or your house or wherever you store those, if your house catches fire and melts down, your Bitcoin will still survive. So you make it more resilient, more defensible. And
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
very small. On a plate that big, that's literally like the size of a credit card, I could store $100 billion, right? You can't, again, with gold, you can't do anything. It doesn't scale that way.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by that.
So you mentioned the like concern with the transactional aspect of gold, and
Yep.
that's totally understandable. Although I'm assuming thousands and thousands of years ago they figured it out.
They did, but how, we could only get so far on that standard,
Yes.
right? At
And then
some
they
po-
went,
at some point, it always runs into the issue of, well, we want to do more. Physical gold only gets us so far, so we create banks and notes. And then you have this failure rate of banks that's sort of baked into, well, there is always the temptation to print more notes than there is gold. And the only way to remove that temptation is to do it by design. And that's sort of what Bitcoin is to me. It's not that you can't be tempted. It's that you can be tempted, but there is a physical restraint because of the nature of Bitcoin itself, because of the nature of the software.
okay, so then like let's talk about transactions with
Yeah,
Bitcoins.
yeah,
How does that work? Because I know that this technology is advancing quite quickly.
yeah.
But you at this stage, what would be the percentage of places you could make a direct transaction, getting a haircut, buying groceries, things like that?
Of
And
course,
how do you like what's the trajectory there?
of course. So in a place like Canada, it's very low, right? We have, for the most part, Canadians would buy or invest in Bitcoin, right? They're holding it, they're saving it for the future, anticipating that it would go up in value. There are, a small handful of stores or on whether online or in person that accept it, but it's not part of our day to day at all.
Okay.
But we, at the same time in Canada, have a financial infrastructure that more or less works. Obviously, there are times where it didn't.
When
and
it
certain
seizes people's bank accounts without
that may,
proper legal channels?
yeah. So there's a few instances, right, where it won't work for you, which highlights the need for money that cannot be censored, right? So
Right.
that's where, again, I would argue there's a big benefit to Bitcoin. But for the most part, even today, even for the those with an unacceptable view, Your bank accounts are mostly restored and people can use dollars freely. But in a place like El Salvador, let's say, where they made Bitcoin legal tender 2 years ago, or 3 years ago perhaps now, it's a very different story. Their financial infrastructure was very poor. They existed solely on a US dollar system. They didn't even have their own currency.
Right.
And so they were at the mercy of the US banking system, which
Right.
rendered them one of the poorest countries on the planet. And if you look at what's happening there today, not totally as a result of making Bitcoin legal tender, but in part, let's say, inspired by the motivations and incentives of Bitcoin, El Salvador is becoming one of the more promising countries in the world right now. There's a lot of hope and prosperity and opportunity there that we're just not seeing here. They're cutting taxes and paying down their debt at record pace. Salvadorians actually want to go back home. They don't want to go to the US anymore. They're actually going back home because there's better hope and opportunity there. And Bitcoin is playing a very key role in that. And as a result, it's attracting both Bitcoin companies and other companies from abroad. I think Google a couple weeks back, or maybe a month or so ago, set up a big new headquarters in El Salvador. That would have been unheard of 5 years ago.
Right.
Oh,
So
in terms of the payments, sorry, you asked me about
yeah,
the payments.
yeah, yeah.
Still, not everyone in El Salvador is using Bitcoin necessarily as payments, but the adoption rate is significantly higher than it is in a place like Canada.
So in El Salvador, for example, did they not then implement banks or build banking systems? They just are deferring to the Bitcoin system that doesn't need physical infrastructure in the country.
So they built their own wallet that citizens can use, but
Oh,
because Bitcoin is an open source program, you don't have to trust the government's, wallet, which I've heard has been, somewhat glitchy and had its issues. You can use any Bitcoin wallet. All the best Bitcoin wallets are open source, meaning they're totally free to download. Um, and yeah, so I could go down there with the Bitcoin wallets I have, whether it's on my phone or laptop right now, and I can run my life. I can pay my bills. I can buy food.
buy a
I can buy
coffee.
real estate, buy a house, buy coffee, all of it, just because I have Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and it is a great solve like a method to solve this problem of internet. Like I had the opportunity to travel a lot throughout. Like when I wasn't a lawyer, I was traveling a lot, and just recently though, I went to the UK,
Yep.
and I had by chance 100. I think it was £100 note or 20 or something a bit higher, and I went to get a coffee.
Yeah.
And I gave it to the lady and just at the train station, and she looked at me like I was an alien. And I was like, sorry, that's all I have. Because I thought it was just too high for like a pound coffee.
Right.
And she was like, no, we don't take cash here. And I was like,
Yeah.
and I found a lot of that actually in the UK, that they had changed it all to electronic payments. They weren't interested in accepting pounds. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do with these pounds now?
Right.
And then you're kind of stuck because you don't, well, I just found that there's been this quick shift.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that has anything to do with Bitcoin, or like, because that like moving to more electronic means.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we can very easily observe that, governments around the world, and they're all at sort of different stages of pushing this, are trying to herd people into digital panopticons of varying degrees and for different, reasons, whether it's vaccine passports and also, or the ArriveCan app, right? And money. And so with money, the difference between something like Bitcoin and something like a central bank digital currency or a national currency is that a central bank digital currency is money with gates around it. It has a moat, right? It's saying we're only going to let so many transactions through. We're only going to let so much value come through. We're going to place all kinds of rules around it about who can use it and when they can use it and why. In the example of a coffee shop not accepting cash, I mean, that just makes no business sense whatsoever. They're hamstringing themselves. They are, maybe they get to collect data or Visa gets to collect data on their buyers, on their customers, And that creates a honeypot of sorts where, okay, you have all this data and you can, if you're Visa or a bank, you get to analyze it and try to push product to people based on their preferences and desires that, you have insights on because of this transaction data. Um, yeah, Bitcoin, it doesn't have those gates. It's just anyone, anywhere, anytime. If you can connect to the internet, you can use Bitcoin. No one can stop you from sending or receiving. And obviously the supply cap is, as is a big part of the value driver for it. Whereas with something like a central bank digital currency, why on earth would it have value? If you already dislike, dollars, Canadian dollars as it is, you're going to hate central bank digital currency.
Yeah, interesting. What about the inventor
Yeah.
man of the Bitcoin? He like this was some anonymous name person or maybe a few people
Yeah.
that came up with this idea. And when did it come into light?
Yeah, so Satoshi Nakamoto is the
Right.
pseudonymous name for the creator of Bitcoin, and whether that's one person or multiple people, we don't really know. Um, he goes by he in chat forums. So he sent out an email to what's called the cypherpunks. It's like a mailing group for cryptographers and freedom oriented, people concerned with freedom in the digital age. Sent out an email on Halloween 2008 outlining his plan for Bitcoin. And then in January 3rd, 2009, he actually launched it.
Okay.
And it started off the first year and a half of its existence. It had no value. It was just sort of a hobby, a toy, something, sort of, and I don't mean this in a mean way, sort of nerds and tinkerers were playing with it,
Yeah.
trying to figure out, hey, what is this? Is this useful? Is it, and eventually, is it valuable? Became another question. But Satoshi was basically in the quote public eye or an online presence for roughly 2 years from that initial email until about a year and a half into Bitcoin's existence. He just walked away, disappeared, and hasn't been heard from again. And so that actually is beneficial, in my view, for a couple of reasons. Number one, could you name a single founder of anything, any company, organization that didn't cash out?
What do you mean? Like it's somebody and then they cash out from their company. Yeah,
So
well,
I mean, right?
well,
If a founder of a company, sells
yeah,
shares in his company, he's not, he's selling his interest. He's saying, okay, I need to take value away from my creation, or I need to benefit somehow from my creation.
right. Yeah. So all of them.
Satoshi's coins have not moved, since he mined them. So there's estimates between, call it 700,000 and a million coins that are in Satoshi's name, and it's hard to say exactly, and that gets into sort of analysis, blockchain analysis, and who mined which coins when, and that's a difficult thing that isn't certain. But the point being, his coins have never moved, and so there's no reason to think they will ever move, and they basically stand, in my view, it's sort of like a timeless monument to, this sounds a little, the altruism of Satoshi, that he created this beautiful, wonderful thing that is very useful for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons in a lot of different situations. And he said, I'm not benefiting whatsoever from it. I'm just walking away. I'm gifting it to the world and just see you later. So, if Satoshi were to come back and say, okay, pull the mask off. Hey, everyone, it's me. I'm Satoshi. And the only real way someone could do that would be to sign an encrypted message from the Genesis block, like from the very first block of Bitcoin, which would prove unequivocally that, oh, you had the key to those first Bitcoin.
Hmm.
If someone were to come back and actually do that, which I very highly doubt will ever happen, it creates a target, right? That person theoretically could be held, quote, responsible for Bitcoin. With every other cryptocurrency that exists, you sort of know who the founders are. And so if the government or anyone ever wanted to shut it down, you know exactly who they'd call, their names, drag them in front of Congress, question them, berate them, and throw them in jail, whatever it takes, because, okay, we want to shut down this one system. Bitcoin, of all the cryptos that are out there, and my outlook is that they are all fatally flawed except Bitcoin. And if you want, we can get into that, but that's a whole conversation on its own. Um, because Satoshi is gone, there is literally no one to call. There is no person, group, entity, no one to call to try to shut it down, or no one to pressure to try to shut it down. It is now like a digital natural resource that exists on the internet that is effectively unstoppable.
So, and it's a pseudonym. So how will they know who it is? And like you said, he would have to provide some documentation. But so are the coins in his name available to the public, or they're in his name?
No, he has the keys, or perhaps destroyed the keys, and that's just me speculating, to those coins. So, if he still has the keys, theoretically he could move them, but there's no reason to think he does. And if someone wanted to try to guess the combination, the private key, his effectively what amounts to his password,
Yeah.
they would have to make 2 to the power of 256 guesses, which is a number that it does not compute. There's no supercomputer or combination of supercomputers that exist in this world that can do that, and we're nowhere even close to that. So it's and that's why, that's part of the reason. It's like there's more. You would have to guess one grain of sand in the entire universe. Like guess the one correct grain of sand in the entire universe to claim coins. So that's why, your private keys, if you secure them correctly, really, really, really keep your coins truly in your full control.
Okay. And so I like maybe let's just talk about physically what it is and on the computer. I kind of get it. There's an app, you transfer, and then there's also a key, and you have to remember the code. So let's just walk through that as basic as you can.
Okay, so let's try to sort of build up Bitcoin from the ground up, in a sense.
Yes.
At the end of the day, Bitcoin is a ledger. And I think, we all know what a ledger is, right? You keep track of debits and credits.
Yeah.
And that's all it really, really is. In its simplest form, is it keeps track of what's sent and what's received, where something went, and where, who received it. And when I say who, well, sorry, let me backtrack. So what happened, you've probably heard the term blockchain, right? You understand that blockchain is sort of a...
I've heard it and kind of understand it. So maybe let's talk about that a little.
So blockchain is the database element of Bitcoin. It is the ledger, the chain of blocks. Every block you could think of as like a page in the ledger. On page 1, I write a few transactions. Person A sent Bitcoin to person B. Person B sent 5 Bitcoin to person C. I write a bunch of transactions. I verify that, yes, when person A sent 10 Bitcoin to person C, he actually had 10 Bitcoin in his wallet to send. He didn't have 5. If you tried to send 10, but you only had 5, Bitcoin would just go, no, does not compute. You have to send from what you have.
So that transaction is a blockchain.
So every page in the ledger, right? We're doing these transactions.
Yeah.
Every 10 minutes, we basically turn the page.
Okay.
So every 10 minutes, we go, yep, all these transactions happened within this time period. Yes, we sign off. They are all cryptographically authenticated. And okay, we turn the page, meaning that page is now etched in stone. It can't be undone or changed. It's permanent. It's gone. Not gone. It's permanently recorded.
Stored, yeah.
And so that's one block. Then a new page starts, and we start writing, okay, person D sent 12 Bitcoin to person F, right? And so on and so on. And every 10 minutes we turn a page, and every 10 minutes a new block is added to the blockchain being the full ledger of all the pages. So that's all the blockchain is in its very simplest form.
Okay. Yeah.
Because you asked me, so that's the transaction part. The apps.
Yeah.
So Bitcoin is software. It has a series of rules. Anyone can download the Bitcoin software and run it. And what that means is if I were to what would be called running a node, that means I am a Bitcoin bookkeeper. I am keeping the ledger. I am watching all the transactions happen, making sure, yes, they are valid, and then keeping
like a human?
Well, it's just a program that runs on a computer.
Program.
Yeah, yeah, it's just a program. You don't have to do the math. There's very complicated math involved, but you don't have to do any of it.
Okay.
So my computer can watch all the transactions that happen every time a block is completed. My personal, server database will keep a permanent record of all transactions, so I can be literally my own bank because I own the ledger. And every 10 minutes when a new block is added, my ledger is constantly checking with everyone else's ledger on the network. Did you have the same transactions? Did you have the same? Did you have the same? Yeah, we're all in agreement. So every 10 minutes, the entire network comes to agreement. And that's what we call consensus. We all come to consensus. This is the state of Bitcoin at this time. That happens automatically every 10 minutes. And so now you have a ledger and we have it authenticated, and we didn't, go into mining, but this is very sort of simplistic explanation. We have a ledger that is authentic. Now you can add apps where my app is a window that looks into that ledger. So whether it's on my phone, on my laptop, whatever it is, all it is doing is looking into that ledger. And if I have a private key, which is, again, sort of a password to the Bitcoin, my private key that my wallet will help me generate allows me not only to look into the Bitcoin blockchain, but spend or access certain coins. Now, I have to own coins. I have to have sent them to my wallet first. So if I buy it on an exchange and I send it to my own wallet, by virtue of having the app, which helps me manage my private key, I literally can take that key, put it in the app, and turn the key in any app that I download. That's because it's all the same functionality, sort of wherever, whether I have it on my phone or laptop or what have you. But with that, I can spend Bitcoin. And the app on your phone, it helps make it easier to navigate and use. So that's all it is. But that's looking into the actual state of Bitcoin and the blockchain,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Well,
It's a tricky thing to explain.
not entirely. So the next
But
question
yeah,
is, do you see this becoming like more the norm? Is that where you see it going, that this is going to be the currency of the future or for the world, not needing banks at all? So like, where do you foresee this? Because
yeah.
it is not the most straightforward thing for sure.
No, of course, but if we backtrack 30 years, email wasn't the most straightforward thing, and most people still today couldn't explain how the underpinnings of email actually works, and yet we all use it on our phone and it makes sense and it's easy, right? So that's
My mom always says, "Can you tweet your brother?" It's like, "Mom, it's a message," but whatever.
yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, basically my outlook is that Bitcoin continues to grow, both in terms of, obviously I think the value will go up, but more importantly, people find it useful. And so because of that, they come to it, they use it. And once you start using it, like the best teacher you could possibly have in Bitcoin is just sending and receiving like a $5 transaction or a $10 transaction. If you were to go to an exchange, buy $10 worth of Bitcoin, send it to yourself, and then send it back to the exchange, that one experience alone, even if you plan on, okay, I'm just going to try, I don't care if I lose the $10 or $20, just to try it, experience is the best teacher. That will teach you so much more than, listening to hours and hours of people talk about Bitcoin. You can get the philosophy of it all, but to actually use it really hammers the point home. But in terms of the future, yeah, I just see that once people do use it, they go, I can sort of see how this is handy and useful and beneficial, and so it's a sticky idea. Once the light bulb goes off and you see it for what it is, no one goes, okay, no, I'm over it, and like they don't come back to it. They all stick with it because it is truly beneficial and useful. And so that process is just going to keep happening. More and more people will continue to come to Bitcoin. And when they come, they'll stick with it. That's been the trend for the last 15 years since Bitcoin started. And I see no reason why that wouldn't stop. And we're even seeing right now, Bitcoin, the stage on which Bitcoin exists continues to elevate itself. The ETFs came out last year, and they were in Canada a couple years before that. And so Wall Street got involved. Now,
ETFs,
exchange traded funds.
Okay.
It's like buying Bitcoin as a stock through your
Right.
brokerage.
Okay. Yeah.
But what I mean by that is, Wall Street spent years denigrating Bitcoin, making fun of it, calling it a scam, and now they're, trying to sell it to customers and say,
Yeah.
hey, you should buy this thing. And those ETFs, by the way, are like the best performing ETFs in history. So that happened. Now you have both Donald Trump and RFK, talking about Bitcoin on the campaign trail. Even Joe Biden is considering accepting Bitcoin donations for.
Yeah.
It's like, they hated Bitcoin not long ago, but now it's becoming more and more of a talking point and a issue that matters to voters. And so it keeps, the stage that it's on, it keeps escalating. And so that's, to me, sort of a sign, if you're, again, reading what's happening with Bitcoin in the real world, that it is continuing to grow and be adopted and be useful and be beneficial and valuable.
So I threw a few things at you, but one of them was, would we still need banks in the future?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about 100 years from now, I would say no. But,
Because of Bitcoin's prevalence.
yeah, my view is that, again, when all the dust settles, and we have many, many years, probably many decades still before the dust fully settles on the decline of the current dollar banking and fiat currency banking system
Yeah.
around the world, and B, the ascent of Bitcoin. So there's going to be this in between period where Bitcoin is more and more adopted, banks still exist, and they fight for relevance. At the very, very end of the day, it's my opinion that we won't really have banks. And why would we? You can be your own bank, and banks as we know them today, are all destined to fail if you understand sort of the nature of the current system, the math implied by the current fiat banking system. There is no scenario where it endures forever, right? That's just not possible. So I think
Because
Bitcoin eventually just
because of
becomes the de facto. It's the only option. It'll be the last thing standing in terms of a form of money, and it just happens to be an excellent form of money.
and for saying that banks like they're geared to fail,
Yep.
is that because they were lending out more than they have?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, do you know what fractional reserve banking is, or have you heard that term before?
I've learned about it a little bit, but let's have a little
Sure.
101.
So, if I were to ask you, let's say we started today, right now in Canada, there were no dollars, zero Canadian dollars anywhere, any banks, central banks, none of it. How do the very first dollars come into existence? Do you know the answer to that?
You print it?
Sort of. The government says, well, I need $100, right? I need to start. I need money so that I can spend it and give it to people and buy things and make things happen in the economy. And the central bank says, okay, we'll
Yeah.
print them for you, but they don't do it just by straight up printing it. All dollars are created out of debt. And so the central bank says, we will lend you $100 at, let's call it 5% interest for argument's sake. So
Yeah.
the government of Canada receives $100, and the Bank of Canada receives a bond, a promise from the government that we will repay the $100 plus 5% interest.
Yeah.
So my question now is, how does the government of Canada, repay the central bank $105 when they only have $100?
Yeah.
Right? It's not possible. So the system is dependent on continuous expansion. They have to keep borrowing to keep paying down the debt. It doesn't matter if interest rates are high or low. At the end of the day, again, when you play it all the way to its logical conclusion, there is no possible way where all the dollars can be repaid. And so you have two choices. Number one, you keep printing, printing, printing to sort of keep the game going, or you default. You admit, you know what, we don't have enough money, we can't repay it,
Yeah.
we have to wipe the slate clean. And so, in my view, it is not politically expedient to default on debt. There is no president, prime minister in the world that goes, yeah, no, we're broke, the government's broke, we're going to default and just start again. There's no one that will do that. And so the game will
It's
go until we print enough that all the money becomes worthless because there's so much of it. And that's, again,
it's such an interesting thing because that's something I've been thinking about when we're like in trillions of dollars of debt. It's
yeah,
like, okay, it sounds like we're bankrupt. Like this is not a good sign. But that did happen, I think, like in was it Sri Lanka that they declared bankruptcy and then the whole like country stormed the palace?
Yeah, that's what happens, and this is and that's I mean I can't speak to the Sri Lankan story in specifically because I'm not familiar with it, but historically, when the government eventually goes broke, you have a lot of people dependent on them.
Yeah.
They get very upset,
Yeah.
and the difference I think this time with Bitcoin around versus if you look at many civilizations throughout history, when the money falls, there is no plan B. And so it falls into chaos. Everyone's starting completely from scratch, right? Where it's just,
Right.
we have to
Yeah.
rebuild economies again through barter. There's a lot of violence and crime and everything. And there's
Yeah.
no order and no way to keep business going so that people can try to keep the lights on and try to keep food going and try to keep a sense of the peace. The difference today versus in all those other instances in history is that if dollars were to completely just shut off and cease to exist tomorrow, everyone can adopt Bitcoin very, very quickly. And in fact, in that kind of scenario, there's sort of a forcing function of, oh, I better figure this out now because, hey, I need to go to work so that I can earn something so that I can put food on the table and pay my rent or mortgage or whatever it may be. Maybe not mortgage at that point, but so that I can keep living my life, right? Like I need to keep being productive so that I create goods and services and others benefit and they want to keep me alive. And everyone around me benefits and flourishes. So in a scenario where, again, the dollar sort of falls, and again, I'm not trying to say this is like the imminent thing that's happening right now.
Yeah.
It could
Of
happen
course.
very quickly, but I don't know when. I have no idea when it might happen. There is a plan B in Bitcoin that is already here and already working, and we can use it very, very easily. And so I think that'll provide a cushion, basically, in the event that something really bad, or when something really bad happens.
What if there is no power?
Right. If there's no power, we have all kinds of issues. Your bank account is gone. All your stocks are gone. The deed to your house most likely is gone. Not that anyone's going to enforce it if there's no communication. So we have major, major issues if the lights go out. I would argue that Bitcoin is the incentive to keep the lights on. Maybe we can go into now. I'll try to keep it again very high level for you, but like the energy space and Bitcoin are very intertwined.
Okay.
If you think about it, right? I think generally people know, and if they don't, Bitcoin it uses energy, right? Mining, the process of turning the page on the Bitcoin
The
blockchain,
data.
the date,
Yeah.
right? And because whenever you create a new block, you sort of earn a reward for doing that, right? That's the incentive to mine. And mining is very energy intensive. It uses a lot of computing power.
So
If
people own those computers that are mining.
Yes, but if you think about it this way, what is the incentive of those miners? Do they want to be, so I live in Toronto, do I want to have a giant server farm in my basement paying Toronto's electricity rates for mining? Or do I want to find the cheapest, hopefully totally free energy that I can? I want to find the absolute cheapest and hopefully, costless energy that I can. So Bitcoin is a direct incentive to produce energy at the lowest
Mhm.
possible cost. And if you think about it from an economic perspective, someone posted this on Twitter recently, but there's no such thing as an energy poor, rich country,
Yeah.
right? If you think about it just very logically, if I don't have electricity, I don't have a fridge, I don't have a stove, I don't have communication, my quality of life is significantly deteriorated. But if I
Yeah.
have a lot of energy and it's very cheap, I can do a lot more stuff. So I'm
Yeah.
better off. Bitcoin is a direct incentive to have the most energy possible. So
Hmm.
not only are we going to tap into existing sources, whether it's, okay, Jesse's going to plug a miner in his basement, but there are guys who are going to go into the brush and just find, a waterfall that's just, or in the case of El Salvador, they have volcanoes. They have tons and tons of geothermal energy that was basically untapped because they had nothing to do with it. Now they're creating so much energy and they can monetize it. They're getting wealthy by ensuring that the power is going to stay on. So you have an incentive to build energy infrastructure. So to your question about what if the power goes off, yes, if the power goes off, sure, there's no Bitcoin for the moment. Bitcoin doesn't disappear. It still
Mhm.
exists until the lights come on again. I
In your wallet.
In your wallet, yeah, it's not like it would just automatically be deleted or anything like that. And if you also think about it, very carefully, there may be isolated power outages, and they're usually pretty temporary, right? When the power goes out, it usually comes back on. Other places in the world still have their power. So Bitcoin exists everywhere. So unless the power goes out all over the world simultaneously and never comes back on, sure, we won't have Bitcoin. But if that's the case, we're going to have problems that far exceed money, right? We're
Hmm.
going to have major, major problems of just human civilization at large. But if we can fight to keep the lights on, and now we have a literal direct incentive to create more, reason to keep the lights on, it's not something I lose sleep over, basically.
Okay, good to know. And so you mentioned you used to be gold
Yeah.
lover.
Gold
That
bug.
wasn't the
Yeah.
word.
Yeah.
Gold bug. And you've turned away from it. So you don't see that they can be mutually beneficial, or do you why is it that you turned away then from gold?
Yeah. Listen, gold has value. I don't argue that. Gold still has value, and in all likelihood, for a very long time, will continue to have value. But will it become money again? Because I think that's
Mm.
what a lot of the sort of gold bugs are banking on, if you want to think of it like that. So for it to become money, we talked earlier about the transaction sort of capacity ability of it. It's not very conducive to like a prosperous, happening digital society. And that's what the optimistic future for me looks like. And that's what I think Bitcoin is ushering in. So I don't think that's a realistic outcome for gold. I think the best hope for gold in terms of monetary value is that countries try to put themselves back on a gold standard,
Hmm.
but then you go right back to the situation that we found ourselves in 1971. How do you guarantee that they will not issue more notes than there is gold? And you can have an auditor audit it, but I mean, FTX, the exchange that went bankrupt, they had an auditor. They still went bankrupt. So you have to trust the auditor. You can't go and personally audit Fort Knox to make sure all the gold is
Hmm.
there. And even if I could make sure that a whole bunch of gold is there, how do I know that this ticket in my hand is actually representative of that specific gold bar? So there's a
Right.
lot of links in the chain that involve a very high degree of trust that are simply not trustworthy. And so, like I said, if countries make go back to the gold standard, gold's value in dollar terms goes up, but it's still not going to like there's still a fatal flaw in that system.
Right. And you believe that the Bitcoin standard or using Bitcoin would eliminate that concern.
And the reason being that it eliminates that concern is I myself can verify the existence of all 21 million coins
Yeah.
from the comfort of my office here. And I can also further verify that of those 21 million coins, X amount of coins belong to me specifically. And
Hmm.
nobody else has any chance whatsoever of spending those coins. They are mine and mine alone.
So 21 million coins, is that enough for everyone in the world? That's a kind of a silly question on
Yeah,
purpose. So what happens is as the value of the Bitcoin goes up, then you are trading it at a lower rate, right? Like to buy something, it wouldn't, maybe at one point it was like 10 Bitcoins and now it's going to be point zero zero
that's
zero
exactly
one.
it. If a coin is worth $10,000 and my house is worth $1 million, right? It costs 100 coins to buy a house. But if I wait a few years and Bitcoin goes from 10,000 to 100,000 and the house stays relatively, let's call it for argument's sake, the same, yes, the value of my house and all goods around me, groceries, like as someone who saves predominantly in Bitcoin, it is, you know, the basically the only asset I own. Everything around me is getting cheaper relative to Bitcoin. So when I spend something that would have cost me 1 Bitcoin 5 years ago, cost me zero point 0.1 today, and might cost me zero point zero 0.01 in another few
Right.
years. And that's a great thing. Why wouldn't you want the value of your money to go up because you
Yeah.
work in the present to save for the future, and you want the value of your present day money to be worth more in the future, or at least hold its value. Gold's value proposition is effectively, if we'll sort of hold its value, but there, we could go through the numbers and try to argue whether it kept up with inflation and do a bunch of decimal places. It doesn't really matter. The bottom line is
Mhm.
it's like barely holding its own at best. The argument for me for Bitcoin is, if we get to a future where there are no dollars in existence whatsoever, I still argue that Bitcoin's value increases forever because everything continues to get cheaper forever on a Bitcoin standard.
I see that. I remember the story of one guy that, well, I don't remember the details, maybe you do, where bought like two pizzas
Yeah,
for what would be like
10,000 Bitcoin.
20, yeah.
It was
And so, and that value.
his name was Laszlo, and I think it was in 2011 or something. He bought two pizzas for something like 10,000 Bitcoin, and it's like a holiday in the world of Bitcoin. Every year we celebrate Pizza Day. I forget the exact day, but
Really?
it's, yeah, every year we celebrate, Pizza Day, the day that Laszlo bought 10,000 or bought two Bitcoin for 10,000 pizzas. And at the time, I think he's been interviewed, not recently, but he's been interviewed about that transaction. And he said, listen, at the time, it was a fine deal. Like, the
Yeah.
Bitcoin didn't even really have any monetary value. So I was happy with the transaction at the time. Could he
The
have
pizza was great.
the pizza? That's exactly it. The pizza was great. Could he have predicted that Bitcoin would be, 70,000 US dollars, 60, whatever the number is today? No, he couldn't predict that. And if he
Yeah.
thought it was going to go up in value, I'm sure that wasn't all his Bitcoin. I'm sure he didn't give all the
Yeah.
Bitcoin he had. It was just, hey,
Yeah.
let's see if someone will accept it. And that sort of sparked maybe there can be like an actual real world value here.
Interesting. So a couple more things, and then I'd like to turn it to you too about the book and anything else. But
Sure.
one thing is, um, like people always say that Bitcoin is one that governments can't access
Can?
and cannot.
Cannot. Yeah.
Cannot. But then with the convoy, there was some controversy there
Yeah.
that they were able to seize it. So do you know much about that and concerns and
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Yeah. I know a little bit about that. So, I mean, we know that both the Give, Send, Go and GoFundMe funds were
Yeah.
seized, right? So 100% of the fiat dollars that were sent to the convoy were seized. 100% of the gold did not make it to the convoy because no one tried to give gold to the convoy.
Yeah.
But
Good point, actually. I didn't see any gold
where were
flowing.
the far more generous than people realize? In fact, today, sorry, I'll go back to your question, I promise. But today, in terms of
No
just
problem.
generosity, an anonymous Bitcoiner donated 8 Bitcoin to Julian Assange, who had to pay like
Oh,
$500,000 to charter a flight because he wasn't allowed to go on a commercial airline. And a Bitcoiner paid 8 Bitcoin that basically covered the whole cost of the flight for him. So
wow.
Bitcoiners are very generous, and I would say care a great deal about freedom and the principles of freedom. But yes, coming back to the convoy and Bitcoin. So what happened was a few Canadian Bitcoiners. I won't name them, but I think they were in newspapers and their sort of names got publicized. Came together and said, "Hey, we want to start a fund because GoFundMe and Give Send Go were shut down to donate Bitcoin to the truckers." They had a man on the ground in Ottawa who said, "Okay, I like because truckers didn't necessarily have Bitcoin wallets on them, didn't know what the hell Bitcoin was, let alone that there was a crowd of shadowy supercoders out there that are like, yeah, I want to give money to these amazing freedom fighters." Um, what happened was they had to print off basically what amounted to a set of instructions of, hey, here's how you download a Bitcoin wallet, whether you have, Android, Apple, or you want to do it on a computer. Here's how you download. Here's a set of instructions. And here is a private key. This will allow you to claim those Bitcoin. And they had to print it on paper because, again, it's not like there was a registry with all the truckers' email addresses, right? There was no, there
Nothing.
was no way other than hand-to-hand, combat, if you want to call it, of actually getting the money to the truckers in that instance.
Yeah.
So they printed off, I believe it was 80 or 100 different wallets, all with the same amount of Bitcoin in it, of the, I believe it was at the time, $1.2 million that was raised. And there was a local Bitcoiner from Ottawa. Again, his name, I think, at least his first name was probably published, but I don't want to name him. But
Yeah.
to Nobody Caribou is his handle on Twitter. my friend, thank you very much for your service. He went around and physically handed out envelopes to a whole bunch of truckers and said, hey, we've donated, the Bitcoin community has rallied together and donated Bitcoin to you.
Yeah.
Follow these instructions to claim your Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
This was a little bit towards the end of the convoy because the first few options had fallen through. And so, okay, B, it had to come together quickly. Like, this hadn't really been done before, right?
Right.
People have sent Bitcoin to activists, but where they say, hey, I have a wallet and I need help. Can you send funds? They already have the wallet. They know what they're doing. In this case, we had to pool together the money, which, and we're giving it to people who don't know they're going to receive it and who don't have a wallet. So printing it out, doling out 100 different envelopes to 100 different truckers. And what happened was, I believe something like 70% of the truckers followed the instructions, claimed the coins. However, the other 30% either, I think, didn't do it basically in time by the time they cracked down on the convoy. And so what happened was those funds ended up getting, seized in the chaos of it all, or lost or destroyed in the chaos of it all. So it was a very difficult circumstance because it's like, how do we get money to people? They don't even know they're about to receive it. We want to give it to them. And we're doing this on short notice. There's no playbook for this.
Yeah.
So they figured it out in relatively short order, found a system that said, okay, this is sort of the best of the trade-offs we can make on short notice. And we've learned from that. And I think there's an educator, a Canadian Bitcoin educator named Ben Perrin. He goes by BTC Sessions. He has tons of helpful YouTube tutorials on how to set up wallets and run a node and all kinds of things. Incredible educator. He's gone to the Oslo Freedom Forum and other conferences around the world, and he gives speeches about, sort of lessons learned from that time period and how we can maybe be better and do this better going forward. But sorry, that's a bit of a side note.
No, good to know. And like I said before we started, I was there, but like there was just so much going on. I didn't actually know all the details about the Bitcoin community coming together. It's just lovely. But very interesting that you guys like printed it out and could give it out to via envelopes with instructions. Like that is, and like you said, you've learned from it, so you guys have ideas of how you could implement that again later. But that's kind of like using the note from the gold, isn't it?
No, because there's that Bitcoin is there. It's not
I guess it's a piece of the gold instead of the note.
It's as if someone gave the physical gold. Yeah, that's what it is. Okay. It's not the promise of gold. It's the actual Bitcoin. Like the 30% that did not get claimed. I donated there's no recourse for that. It's gone. I gave on the hope and the assumption that they're going to make a best effort to donate that and distribute it, but it was still incumbent on the truckers to say, someone just donated $8,000 worth of Bitcoin to me, and I think that was the amount that went out to all the truckers. I should follow this now and make sure I have it, and if they didn't do it, it's unfortunate. I wish they had. I want them to I know they went through a lot of personal turmoil and trouble, and I'm sure financial issues as a result of it. But yeah, at the very least, we can say, what was more successful? Fiat currency, 0% got through, right? Give, send, go, and GoFundMe. Gold, no one even tried. And then Bitcoin, okay, 70% got through. We would have liked 100%, but that's not bad for sort of a first time trying to do this.
And so you did mention some might have gotten destroyed, and I've heard this before too, is somebody had like a ton of Bitcoin and didn't see the value increasing, threw it out in the garbage. And then, so like you have no recourse, you said before. Like, is there any way of ever getting that value back, that money back, or how does that work?
Like I said, in terms of guessing it, basically the answer is no. Okay. Depending on the nature of the circumstance, how you lost it, what information you might have about, before you lost it, it's sort of circumstantial of, maybe you have enough information, we can try to piece it together or find a location. But yeah, generally speaking, if you lose your private key, those coins are gone. And that comes back to, hey, I have to be personally responsible. You have two choices basically in this world when it comes to money. You can trust an intermediary. A bank is an example of an intermediary. I can
Yeah.
trust the bank to hold all my money. Do you trust the bank to hold all your money?
Not as much anymore.
So your other option is I have to be personally responsible. Or
Yeah.
you could
Yeah.
work, within people who you trust to say, okay, not to say that I want people to give me their Bitcoin and I want to hold it for them. I literally do not. I absolutely do not want to hold Bitcoin for people, and I do not hold Bitcoin for others. I encourage people to go, you have to go on a bit of a hero's journey to figure out how and why it is beneficial to hold money for yourself, to be responsible for yourself. It is individually empowering to be in
Yeah.
full control of your wealth, and know that if the bank wants to take my assets and my bank account, great. They can, what do I have? I have a mortgage and, just enough money to get, just enough cash to get by. Take it. I don't want the debt. You have it. Um,
Yeah.
but my wealth, they have zero control over. And so
Yeah.
Bitcoin gives me that power, but I have to be responsible for it.
Yeah, and you mentioned that responsibility before, and I think that's really important and helpful. I think, that's the concern that I have because it's because we haven't really had to manage that. And it's become such a distant transaction. Like now you take your card, you don't even have to swipe it, put in a code, you just tap
Yeah.
it. It's so removed
Yeah.
from us, and somebody's doing something in the background, and we trust it
Yeah.
as much as we can. And then you look at your credit card thing, and you're like, some of these, like, there's people that have gone, months and years with transactions that they're not even aware of what they were and why they were charged for it.
Yeah.
So I think the personal responsibility is something that's so important, and obviously on all aspects of our life.
That's what I
But
was going to say. Like, as a society, we sort of need to relearn the real meaning of personal responsibility. And the
yes.
way I think about it, Bitcoin taught me that. Like, truly, I internalized that lesson as a result of Bitcoin. And it wouldn't have been, gold didn't teach me that, and dollars didn't teach me that. I had to see or
Yeah.
experience getting burned by the existing system of, oh, they printed $600 billion. I cannot trust that system. They just detached from the gold standard. I cannot trust that system. Why do I
Yeah.
trust Bitcoin? Because I can verify it. I don't actually have to
Yeah.
trust it. I can confirm for myself that it is here and it works and it's real and the value is, and speaks for itself in a sense right now.
Yeah, very interesting. So just before we wrap it up here, and for some reason it looked like it wasn't recording, so I hope it was recording the whole time. But I want to hear about your book a little bit more too. Why you wrote it, what you hope it's helping people with, and where you could find it.
Sure. So, quick background on the book. I never set out really to write the book. I after I left my corporate job to sort of pursue, whatever it was I was going to do in the world of Bitcoin, because I understood Bitcoin is very important and it's going to help a lot of people. I eventually decided that, you know what, I guess I will try to make a slide deck, and I'll pitch Bitcoin to sort of high net worth investors. I used to work in wealth management, so it sort of made sense for me. And within a couple weeks, I had like 80 slides. It was enormous. So I showed it to a friend of mine, and he goes, Jesse, like, you're an idiot. No one's going to spend 5 hours listening to you do the slide deck, but this is a good outline for a book. You have a skeleton for a book. Put some meat on the bones. You might have something here. And so I sort of slept on it and woke up the next day and was like, well, that's a great idea. So this is the final product of that process. This is Magic Internet Money, a book about Bitcoin. And I sort of set out to answer the question, what is money? I basically, when I told you I kept, or I started this as a slide deck, I basically kept the format of every slide. You try to
Okay.
convey one idea on a slide, one big idea or
Yeah.
one big theme on a slide. So my book, it's one page at a time. Every page is individually numbered. There's a historical quote I have, whether it's economists and philosophers, I quote Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, you name it. I have,
What's your Charlie and the Chocolate Factory quote? Can I put you on the spot with
yeah, let
that?
me quickly go find it. I have full page images, as well as I sort of flashed there. I think it's early in the, it's relatively early in the book, so I'll find it in just a
While
minute.
you're looking,
Yeah,
that's very similar to
there's
why I started
full,
writing a
full
book.
page images.
Yeah, that's great. But it was the same reason I just started teaching a course and making handouts, and I'm like, I really think this would be helpful and useful to more people. So it's still in the process, hopefully getting that out soon. I completely understand the
Yeah,
genesis of
it's
the book.
here, I think I'm coming up on it. It's just, it's a way I want to communicate the ideals and principles of Bitcoin because I know it's a complex subject. I wanted to try to
Yeah.
simplify it to the best of my ability, so that it was that I could make the topic friendly and relatable and sort of digestible. It's not my expectation that you're going to read the book and walk away going, "Oh, I'm an expert." Like that. That's not the goal. The goal is, you read it, you go, "Yeah, there was a lot of things that I understood and made sense here. I don't fully have the image. I can go back and reread certain points again because it's very easy to index, okay, this idea or that idea because of the way the pages are broken down individually."
Yeah.
And it's sort of a launching point. I'm taking you on a guided tour of the shallow end of the pool, and if you like it, if the water feels, warm, you enjoy the temperature, okay, you'll jump into the deep end, you'll go swimming, and you'll
Cool.
learn a whole lot more about Bitcoin. So the quote I have from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is this quote: "There's plenty of money out there. They print more every day. But this ticket, there's only five of them in the whole world, and that's all there's ever going to be. Only a dummy would give this up for something as common as money. Are you a dummy?"
Good one. I love it.
There you go.
So, well, and there's your correlation, obviously, to Bitcoin. Thank you for that. Unless there's anything else, I'm sure I'll put the link on. It's on Amazon, the book,
Yeah.
and you're on X. And where else can people find you?
Yeah, right now, on X and Amazon, I'll send you the links for my book. Although I think you'll find it in the bio there. That's it for now. If anyone has any questions about whether it's Bitcoin or they want to learn, I'm happy to talk to them. If they want free resources, there's tons of great free resources. If they want like actual physical or Zoom, whatever help with it, you can send me a message, whether it's over X or I'll give you my email address at magicbitcoinbook@gmail.com. So you can contact me there, reach out with any questions, and I will do my best to help you, direct you, whatever it may be.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much, Jesse. That was great. Lots of learning, I guess, and just giving us some more ideas and empowering us with knowledge and personal
And personal
responsibility. I
responsibility.
love that. I actually had no idea that that was kind of one of the goals with Bitcoin.
There's a lot of
I'm
layers
into
to.
that.
There's a lot of layers. Oh, sorry, you cut out there. There's a lot of layers to Bitcoin, and I hope people will try to start peeling back a couple and figuring it out because I think it's very important and will play a bigger and bigger role in our world in the years to come.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again. And I think I forgot to mention to you that I usually do a few more minutes with the Twitter or X subscribers. So we'll cut it here and then I'll get you on again.
Sure.
Thank you.